I was asked to pick out a book that inspired me, so I went for the autobiography of Malcolm X.
Hello, this is Police Scotland's Hate Crime Hotline. How can I help you?
I'd like to report a hate crime, please.
What sort of hate crime is it you'd like to report?
It's possessing inflammatory material.
And which protected characteristic is involved?
Race, stirring up racial hatred is the issue.
And what is it? Is it a video? A poster?
It's a book, actually. I'll just read you a few quotations. The white man was created a devil to bring chaos on the earth. And the author talks about the creation of a devil race, a bleached out white race of people, blonde, pale-skinned, cold, blue-eyed devils. Savages, nude and shameless, hairy like animals. They walked on all fours and lived in trees. Eventually this race of people returned to the mainland among the natural black people. This devil race turned out to have been... the devil race turned what had been a peaceful heaven on earth into a hell torn by quarrelling and fighting. Our enemy is the white man. Who has the lowest morals if not whites? And it talks about the cesspool morals of white men. Now, I don't know about you, but that certainly sounds offensive and abusive to me. And I think it's definitely likely to stir up racial hatred, as the law specifies.
Yes, it definitely sounds abusive and insulting to me. Did the person intend to stir up racial hatred with this material?
To be honest, I don't think so, but that doesn't matter in the new law, does it?
Quite right. The person can be guilty regardless. Were they publicising this text?
They were indeed. They made a YouTube video where they were recommending this book, holding a copy of it in their hand.
Which YouTube channel was that?
Let me just check. It's called Transport Scotland. It's a Scottish government channel.
Could you identify the perpetrator?
I can, actually. It's a man called Humza Yousaf. You know, the one who came up with this new law about possessing inflammatory material that could stir up racial hatred.
Ah, yes. We know him well. How would you like us to proceed?
Well, I've checked the law. If you could enter his home by force if necessary, seize the book, then prosecute him, and hopefully he'll go to prison for the maximum of 7 years.
We'll see what we can do. Would you like to be referred to our Hate Crime Victim Support Service?
To be honest, no, I don't think that's necessary. I just need closure. But I'm sure knowledge that the Justice Secretary is behind bars will help me to move on. Thanks.
We really appreciate your bravery in coming forward. Thanks. Goodbye.
Right, goodbye.
As a teenager, I was a lot like a hothead, pretty much like Malcolm X in his early days.
So Humza Yousaf used to be like Malcolm X, a bit hot-headed. What he really means by that? Malcolm X's sort of teenage, early adult life was dominated by crime, burglary, drug dealing, and a lot of other things. I guess Humza Yousaf's not talking about that. He's talking about Malcolm X's phase when he was a black nationalist, a member of the Nation of Islam organisation. Now, Nation of Islam is almost completely unrelated to Orthodox Islam. I mean, they believe that a mad scientist created the evil white race. I don't really hear any reference to Muhammad and the Quran in their teaching. But right near the end of his life, Malcolm X changed his views somewhat. He softened them to some degree when he embraced more Orthodox Islam. But he made his name preaching racial hatred for 12 years. So let's hear the sort of things that Malcolm X was preaching in his so-called hot-headed phase, as Humza Yousaf calls it.
You're quoted as having said when an airliner crashed with a number of white people on board that you were glad it happened.
The white race in this country collectively are guilty of these crimes that our people are suffering from collectively, and therefore they would suffer some collective disaster, collective grief. And when that plane crashed in France with 130 white people on it, and we learned that 120 of them were from the state of Georgia, the state that my own grandfather was a slave in, why, to me, it couldn't have been anything but an act of God, a blessing from God, and I frankly and sincerely pray for similar blessings from him to repeat themselves as often as he can spare them.
But I take it then you support the freedom-loving attempts of the peaceful marchers in Alabama and these places.
You don't get freedom peacefully. Freedom is never safeguarded peacefully. Anyone who is depriving you of freedom isn't deserving of a peaceful approach by the ones who are being deprived of their freedom.
In the South, you are segregated by that dog. In the North, you integrated with this dog. And it's no different. Well, the dog is their best friend. The dog is their closest relative. They got the same kind of hair, the same kind of skin, and the same kind of smell. Oh, yeah. But since the Honorable Elijah Muhammad has come and taught us the religion of Islam, which has cleaned us up and made us so we can see for ourselves, now we can see that old pale thing to look exactly as he looked. Nothing but an old pale thing. So this isn't hate teaching. This is love teaching. This is love talk. We love you, but we don't love him. We want to unite with you, but we don't want to unite with him. We recognize you as our brother, but we don't recognize that old blue-eyed thing as our brother. Let him go on and be a brother to himself.
The Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us that the black man is the original man.
The black man by nature is divine.
Now, does this mean that the white man by nature is evil?
By nature, he is other than divine.
Well, now, does this mean that he's evil? Can he do good?
By nature, he is evil.
And what we have foremost in common is that enemy, the white man. He's an enemy to all of us. I know some of you all think that some of them aren't enemies. Time will tell.
If we are anti-anything, we're anti-intermarriage. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us that intermarriage will bring about the destruction of both the white race and the black nation. And we're absolutely against intermarriage.
You don't have a peaceful revolution. You don't have a turn the other cheek revolution. There's no such thing as a non-violent revolution. We are here to tell you to love the white man. You have come to the wrong place. But no matter what happens, we don't teach you to turn the other cheek. But at the same time, we teach you that anyone who puts his hand on you, do your best to see that he doesn't put it on anybody else. God is after it. God is the one that's making his ship sink in the sea. God is the one who brings his airplanes crashing out of the sky full of white folks. God is the one that makes his cars crack up on the highway. God is the one that's giving polio to his little children and making his senators die with heart attacks. That's the work of God. Those are blessings from God. That's a wicked race. And God is making his children be born today, deformed, demented, or dead. That's from God. God is after the white man. God doesn't love ugly, and there's nothing on this earth uglier than that blue-eyed, stringy-haired, bad-smelling race of devils. You haven't got no time to cry no tears for no Jews. Cry tears for yourself. Let him solve his problem and you solve your problem. Why, they only killed 6 million Jews. Only 6 million Jews were killed by Hitler. Uncle Sam killed 100 million black people, bringing them here. Yeah, 100 million. 100 million. Don't let no Jew get up in your face and make you cry for him. Tell them if they're interested in your problem, that you have some of these stores, instead of opening stores up all in your neighborhood and robbing you deaf, dumb, and blind. Yes, the Jews do that. And some of them blue-eyed Jews are going to walk away from here and say that I'm saying something anti-Semitic, anti-hell. This government will provoke a civil war among white people by trying to force white people to give their jobs to our people. And our people will provoke a race war by trying to make white people give up their jobs. White people were up to eating each other up. They still eat each other up. You've seen these berries and things running around here. Those are white people. That's the way they live. They're cannibals. They're savages. They have no moral. A low-down, filthy race. The most filthy race on this earth. They used to live in the caves. They walked on their all fours. They were naked like animals. They couldn't walk upright. They didn't wear clothes. They didn't cook their food. Why, they ate raw meat. They still like their meat rare. Rare? Raw. That's the dog in them, brother. That's the animal in them, brother.
Now that's not what I would call hot-headed. That's what I would call racist hate-mongering. Stirring up hatred by anyone's definition. If that's not stirring up racial hatred, then what is? So Humza Yousaf would want Malcolm X sent into prison, according to the law he's promoting, but it seems like he actually just wants to call him, it's a bit youthfully hot-headed. That's not hot-headed. Being hot-headed is maybe losing your temper and punching someone in the pub, or swearing at an interviewer or something. Malcolm X was not hot-headed. He was calm and unruffled as he preached his doctrine of racial hatred. Humza Yousaf says he's an inspirational figure, but as far as I'm concerned, spending 12 years stirring up racist hatred and then sort of partially changing your mind in your final few months doesn't make you a figure to emulate. Now, Humza Yousaf is obviously biased, isn't he? When it comes to anti-white racism, that's just your sort of youthful hot-headedness. When it comes to anything anti-black or Arab or Asian or whatever, then that's definitely very serious hate speech, and the people need to be sent to prison. I mean, remember Humza in Parliament when he was making his now famous speech complaining about people in various positions being white. You could hear the disdain and hostility in his voice.
In the Scottish Government, every Director General is white. Every chair of every public body is white.
Now, we heard Malcolm X, didn't we, saying that there needs to be a war in order to take the jobs off white people and give them to black people. Well, I think Humza Yousaf is very definitely on that sort of wavelength. Now, Humza is the Justice Secretary, and a key feature of justice is that it should be blind, impartial. But it seems like there's very good reason to doubt Humza Yousaf's impartiality on this issue. Let's take a step back and just talk about Malcolm X's life a little bit more. His father was murdered when he was very young by a racist organisation akin to the Ku Klux Klan. That's not definite, but it seems very likely that that's what happened. His mother was mentally ill, and Malcolm X ended up living with various foster families. Then after that, he went into a life of crime. I think in that context, no father figure, I think you could almost see that coming with him. He ended up in prison. When he was in prison, he converted to the teachings of the Nation of Islam. And the leader of the Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad, became like a father figure to Malcolm X, corresponding with him in prison, and then he took him under his wing when he came out of prison. Now, within the racism of early 60s America, you can sort of imagine how Malcolm X went on the journey that he did. Basically, hatred bred hatred. And Malcolm X was a talented speaker, as a clever chap as well. So when he preached his hatred, it became very influential. He found a wide audience for it. And his objective was to turn the American black civil rights movement away from its peaceful and successful strategy, promoted by Martin Luther King, etc. He wanted them to move to something much more direct and much more violent. Now, in his final months, he fell out with Nation of Islam and left them, not over their teachings, over some other things, and then his views softened to some degree.
Upon reading Malcolm X and reading his life journey, he was somebody who was very set in his beliefs. But then after his trip to Mecca, where he went for the Hajj pilgrimage, he sat beside white people, beside Chinese people, so people of all colours, all races, and of course of the Muslim faith. And that completely changed his worldview from one of segregation to one of when it came to a cohesive multicultural society. And the fact that he was able to change his beliefs through meeting with people, through engagement, through using the faculties of his own intellect, I suppose inspired me as a youngster that maybe I shouldn't be so hard set in my ways, but be open-minded.
So Malcolm X embraced Orthodox Islam to some degree, which is not a racist creed, and he changed his views somewhat. But listen to the way he expressed it. We are all truly the same, brothers, because their belief in one God had removed the white from their minds, the white from their behaviour, and the white from their attitude. Now that sounds to me like he's saying that whites can be cured by becoming Muslims, then the bad whiteness can be sort of drawn out on them in some way. I would say maybe his beliefs did move on a little bit from that as well in the final weeks of his life. But the reformed Malcolm X was still race obsessed. Listen to this interview. This is very much from his final phase just before he was assassinated.
You've called people like Martin Luther King, who just got a Nobel Peace Prize, an Uncle Tom. Is this correct, first?
Well, I'd rather say that in the States there's a law
that has recently been passed, or a decision handed down by the court, wherein if you call someone an Uncle Tom, they can sue you for libel.
Well,
so I never refer to them as Uncle Toms. I would say that Uncle Martin is my friend.
Uncle Martin is your friend, yet you would disagree with his approach to what he wants to accomplish.
Definitely. If his approach would bring about what the black man in America needs to completely eliminate the problem that we have, I would say well and good. But I very much doubt that anyone who adopts the approach that Martin Luther King has been teaching to our people in that country can point to any meaningful gains that has actually served to solve the problem.
So you see here, he's still attacking the peaceful civil rights movement right up until just before his assassination. But Humza Yousaf doesn't seem to have an issue with that at all. He's still this figure to be admired. Now note the way that Malcolm X bypasses and makes a mockery of the legal threat to his freedom of speech, that you're not allowed to call someone an Uncle Tom. So what does he do? He speaks in code. What will happen if Humza Yousaf's legislation goes through? People will start to speak in similar code. Now the problem with that is once people can't actually say what they think, then you don't actually know what people think. So you might have someone with the most appalling views, but they never really say them because they know they'd get prosecuted, and the wider public never knows. So these people, they might even end up, say, getting elected. So someone gets into the Scottish Parliament because no one ever actually really found out what they thought, because Humza Yousaf made sure that no one actually found out. So Malcolm X was not a hero, he was a dangerous and hate-filled demagogue who partly came to his senses at the very end of his life. He's an interesting character, you can feel some sympathy for him, you might admire his commitment, his drive, his talent, but was he a good influence in the world? No, definitely not. In this current era of racial tension, a lot of people are reviving Malcolm X's race-obsessed political and moral outlook, and there are plenty of followers for the views he spent the majority of his life preaching. If you look on YouTube, there are lots of speeches by him, and the comments underneath are predominantly people saying, oh, this is wonderful, we need a new modern-day Malcolm X to emerge to lead us. So Malcolm X's journey from hatred to more moderate views, how did it happen? Well, he reconsidered, he debated, he came under other influences. What would have happened if he'd have been locked up for hate speech, as Humza Yousaf, maybe the law would have said he should have been? What would that have done? That probably would have cemented him in his views, filled him with even more resentment, inflamed his hatred to an even higher degree. His followers would have been even more inflamed as well. I mean, I think literally it might have led to civil war in America if he had actually been imprisoned. So Humza, question for you. Would this story have turned out better if he'd have been locked up a couple of years into his hate preaching? If you think that would have been better, then go ahead with your current hate speech bill in the Scottish Parliament. If you don't think that would have been helpful, then you need to ditch your hate speech bill. Maybe if Malcolm X had been in prison for 7 years, he would have never gone to Mecca, he would have never come under the influence of more orthodox Islam, and he would have never left behind the worst of his racial extremism. Okay, 5 points to conclude. Number 1, Humza Yousaf is extremely sensitive to anti-black, Asian, minority ethnic racism, and he complains against racism against himself routinely, but he seems oblivious to anti-white racism and also anti-Semitism. I showed some in the video, and there's a bit in the book as well that he is commending. Number 2, it never seems to have crossed Humza Yousaf's mind that Malcolm X was stirring up racial hatred. The fact that he can't see that connection, even though he's promoting this hate speech bill and he knows there's videos on YouTube that he made a couple of years ago, he doesn't put 2 and 2 together, he doesn't take the video down, he severely lacks judgment. Number 3, prosecuting people for hate speech reduces the chances of reform through dialogue and instead creates martyrs, heroes. Right, number 4, hate speech legislation that Humza Yousaf is promoting is extremely broad, and he should be prosecuted under his own law for possessing this book. Now he could try the defence, oh, Malcolm X partly changed his mind later in the book, but someone reading the book might think, no, I agree with the first vast majority of it, rather than a little bit at the end where he's partly changed his mind. These earlier chapters, they were written when Malcolm X actually believed it, not when he was looking back at it. They were written at the time when that's what he actually was preaching. Maybe Humza Yousaf could claim in court he had reasons to possess a copy of this hate material. It was for academic interest. But no, it wasn't. He was promoting it on YouTube. So I'm deadly serious when I say Humza Yousaf would be guilty under his own possessing inflammatory material law. If you swapped white for black in the comments in that book, Humza Yousaf would definitely want you locking up. But swap them back for white and he actually promotes the book himself. Right, number 5, Nation of Islam. I mean, Nation of Islam was just like race identity politics on steroids. I think it still is. Orthodox Islam was what Malcolm X was attracted to more in his final months. Where's Humza Yousaf in all this? Well, if you look at Humza Yousaf's interests and values and emphases and priorities, it's race identity politics. Okay, it's a diluted version compared to Nation of Islam, but I can see why Humza Yousaf would be on that wavelength. Whereas Orthodox Islam, how often do you hear Humza Yousaf arguing for something you think, oh yeah, that's reflecting Orthodox Islamic teaching? Well, somewhere in the region of never. When he voted for same-sex marriage, he seems to support all the progressive so-called values of the SNP. No sign of Orthodox Muslim values. I mean, how could there be? He supports the SNP. So I believe that Humza Yousaf admires Malcolm X because he relates to his values and priorities, race identity politics rather than the Orthodox teachings of Islam. Well, I'd just like to say hello to Humza Yousaf at this point. I'm sure you'll watch this video, and I'd like to invite you to debate its content. We'll be very happy to do that online or in person. Now, to be honest, I'm almost certain that you won't, because it could be an absolute disaster for you. But if you were up for it, we're ready and waiting. But can you just imagine if the Scottish Family Party had MSPs in the Scottish Parliament, we could put Humza Yousaf on the spot about this issue in the debating chamber. And could you imagine that? If you want to see that happening, you need to support the Scottish Family Party in our quest to make that happen. And the best way you can support us is by joining via the link below. And if you think maybe you could be the person to stand up in the Scottish Parliament and put Humza Yousaf on the spot, then maybe you could be a candidate for us in the election next year. If you're interested in that, join up, then put yourself forward. You can also sign up to our newsletter in a link below as well. Thanks for watching.